Hi, thanks for joining us today. My name is Julie Tomkovic, and I'm with the County to County Trainings Program. And this is a bit of a rebroadcast and re-record on a previous webinar on canvassing. And you can see the first slides here for it. We're going to skip over some of the intro slides since you'll be watching the tape version of this, but this was originally done by Jim Foster and Karen Sindelar with backup by Ian Gardner and Jenny McMillan. Okay, again, we're going to skip over how you would engage in the chat room since you're listening to the tape version of this, or the recorded version, actually. But the goal of this webinar is that by the end of the session, you truly will know what canvassing is and why we do it, why it's so important, that you'll understand the basic canvass conduct and doorstep etiquette, what is expected of you to engage in a positive interaction. You'll learn the key parts of a canvassing conversation, and of course you'll learn the role of and the importance of data collection in canvassing. If the information is not, if the data information is not gathered correctly to be later entered correctly and it's not receivable or readable or understandable, then part of the purpose of the canvassing will be lost. So we'll definitely be talking about the data collection section. And then you'll receive some tips for canvassing for further reference. There are backup documentation that can go along with this webinar, and you can inquire with us a little bit later if you don't have some of that backup information. That includes some sample scripts for canvassing, and again, a little bit on the tips for canvassing. All right, now, what is canvassing? Well, on the most basic level, it is an act or process of attempting to secure votes or ascertain opinions by talking to people one-on-one. What could be more basic than that? Knocking on doors and talking to people one-on-one. And so that's why these are door-to-door contacts. Gives you an opportunity to update any voter information, see if it's still current, see if somebody has moved, see if their phone number or their email address has changed. Gives you an opportunity to determine who really is a supporter. In North Carolina, we do have some legacy Democrats, people whose families always registered as Democratic, but they really haven't voted that way in quite some time. So it gives you an opportunity to find out who really is a supporter for the party or for a particular candidate or on a particular issue. And it may give you an opportunity to really secure some votes and help give people a reason to come to the polls. Please always remember, especially on days when it's hot and you're tired and you want to go home, do remember that canvassers and phone bankers are the backbone of the Democratic Party's ground game. You and your fellow participants are truly essential in our work to help gain a veto-proof, or to end the veto-proof majority that Republicans had in the North Carolina state legislature right now. We want to flip at least 4 seats. I think we'll probably do better than that, but the goal is at least 4 seats and to hold on to our advances on the judicial side. Okay, now we're going to catch up a little bit, and I'm going to be switching over. You're going to hear the audio from Jim Foster speaking, and then later Karen Sindelar. But hold on a moment, and if technology is going to work with me today, then I'll bring in those 2 voices for you.
Trying to stop the trend that seems to be accelerating in this country. Flip some seats in North Carolina, flip some seats in Congress, and begin turning the direction of this country around. And that's why I'm here on a Saturday morning. And I imagine some version of that is why you're here Saturday morning. And that's why you are interested in going out and canvassing. And that's why I go out and canvass. So that's really why canvass. But more specifically, we canvass because it is the most effective way of increasing voter turnout. There's a book that's referenced in the bottom right of this slide by Green and Gerber, who are political science professors at Yale and Columbia, who have done a lot of research in what is actually effective in campaigning, what works and what doesn't work. I recommend that book to you. It's on Amazon, not terribly expensive, in paperback. And one of the things that I got from it is how much of the standard dogma about campaigning has never been shown to be true. The only thing that's actually in any kind of scientific, prospective, randomized, it's hard to randomize in politics, but it's in any kind of carefully designed study, the only thing that's been shown to actually be effective in turning out people to vote is door-to-door canvassing. And it's important also to have an idea of what that level of effectiveness is, because when you're canvassing, it oftentimes seems to you, look, I'm really working hard and I'm not reaching as many people as I thought. And am I really making a difference with it? Is it really worthwhile? That's a totally natural question to ask. Well, what Green and Gerber have shown that you can roughly count on a 1 in 15 rule. That is, for every 15 people that you talk to, you will get one more vote turnout. Now, I think that's kind of a low number, because that's if you're looking at non-targeted lists where many of the people aren't going to vote anyway, or they're going to vote the other way. The targeted lists, we'll go into that a little bit more later. The targeted lists, you'll probably be more like 1 in 7 to 1 in 8 rule. But still, you have to expect that that's the turnout, which is why lots and lots and lots of doors need to be knocked on during a campaign. The group Break the Majority, which is Governor Cooper's statewide campaign to flip seats, plans to knock on over 600,000 doors in North Carolina between now and Election Day. That's a lot of canvassing. But that's the numbers that they need to do in order to turn out enough extra votes to not only flip seats, but in this election, it's critically important also to defeat these 6 amendments that came out of the short session of the legislature, and to elect Anita Earls to the Supreme Court. Those are the only statewide elections that we have, but they're very, very critical. Okay, beyond that, canvassing increases the visibility of Democrats in your county and of the Democratic Party in general, which is very important. But probably the most important thing you can do is at the end of your interaction at the door, you can leave people pleased and satisfied with your county's Democratic Party. Just leave them with a great feeling about it. And not only about the county party, but about the Democratic Party in general, and about politics and the direction that we can go. Now, a lot of people, when they consider canvassing, have doubts. Maybe not. They just have concerns about it. And as the little cartoon indicates, they're just kind of nervous about it. It can feel intimidating. Well, there are some common concerns about canvassing. One is it's just, oh man, I don't want to go out and do all that hard work and just grind it out and have no fun when I could be having fun on a beautiful Saturday morning in July. Well, yes, it does take work, and it can get uncomfortable. It's not true, however, that it's not fun. The fun part is you get to talk to some really good people, and it's very, very satisfying. Some people have an idea about themselves that they're just an introvert and can't talk to people. And I don't want to get too deeply into that, but I think a lot of us, I'm myself have always been an introvert, but I've been able over the years to find ways to, when I need to not be. So I think people have more in them oftentimes than they know. So I just encourage those of you who have that idea or have friends or associates to say, there may be more to you than you think. You actually can get out and talk to people. And then another idea people have is, I just not good at talking to people. Well, it may be an opportunity for you to have a breakthrough in this and develop your ability to talk to people. Because I think you'll be surprised when you get out there after the first few when you're nervous and realize, you know, this is going pretty well. I really can talk to people. Now, the last one here is very common. That is, I'm going to get yelled at and threatened by angry people. Well, the truth of the matter is that there are not very many angry people. And if there are people who, occasionally you come across somebody who has a different view, they're Republican or they support Trump, most of them are actually polite. They may be distant and not particularly happy to see you, but they're not going to get unpleasant. And so the unpleasant, scary, or upsetting interactions are very, very few and far between. In years of canvassing, I've had a few, but almost none. So almost cross that off the list because it's just not likely to happen. And one reason is that we use what we call targeted lists. That is, lists that are put together. The voting list is sorted so that it includes Democrats and independents who lean Democratic. And so they're likely to be friendly. They're wrong sometimes, and you may get somebody who, you know, Republican or an old-time North Carolina Democrat who really just hasn't bothered or changed the registration, of which there are quite a few, who sees things differently. But as I said, they'll usually be polite. Most of the time, you'll end up having either just a conversation with somebody who's kind of in a hurry, doesn't want to talk very long, but it's not a bad conversation, or you have people who are just delighted that you came through the door and they are glad to talk, and you have really good conversations. The main purpose of being out there is engaging supporters and urging them to vote. You're not out there to convert voters who disagree. That's not part of what canvassing is nowadays. Okay, getting ready to canvass. Well, you'll get a lot of canvassing materials or a lot of paperwork. One of them will be a list of voters at their last known address, and Karen in her part later on has a sample that she's going to show you of what those look like. You'll get a map showing location of the houses that you'll be canvassing. I'm going to flip to the next slide, which shows this. This is from North Carborough Precinct from Carborough Precinct in Orange County. Just shows the way it shows the roads, and it shows the red dots where the houses are located. So that, for example, in the middle there's Quail Roost Drive, and you have somebody say at 16 Quail Roost Drive, and you can see where it probably is on Quail Roost Drive, and we'll drive right up to it. So you have a map of what we call the turf, or the area that you'll be canvassing. It will look like this. You should carry a few voter registration forms to register new voters. Now, not just new voters, a lot of people have moved since they last voted. Almost nobody realizes that when they move, even if it's in the same county or even the same precinct, they have to update their address with the Board of Elections. So if somebody has moved to that address recently, they may need to update their registration. Also, if you may knock on a door where somebody lives that has recently moved in there, and the lists have not changed, and they need to vote. They need to register to vote. So have voter registration forms, and make sure that you get a very brief introduction to what you need to do to register people to vote. It's really very easy to do, but there are some things that you should know, just basic things. A lot of canvass directors want you to take out a piece of blank paper so you can write down comments and information that a voter will give you, and particularly information about people who want to volunteer. Other canvass directors will have you write it on the data sheets, which makes it very difficult sometimes for the people entering data to know what to enter. But they may want you to have a separate piece of paper. Now, other materials that you'll have is something to write on, a clipboard or a notepad, so you can hold it in your hand and write it. More and more, however, nowadays, we're using tablets or smartphones, and there are digital ways of recording data and actually even displaying the addresses and names. The group Break the Majority, which I referred to earlier, Cooper's campaign organization, is going to do a lot of using smartphones and a program called Minivan. So it may be that these printed lists as we go through this campaign may be set aside in many areas. So we may need to get used, we will have to get used to doing it electronically. If it's entered, however, in the paper, make sure that you have pencils or preferably black pens with you. That most campaign directors will have those available to hand out to you. Some people like to carry a soft bag around to carry materials because you can, the extra literature that you're handing out can get bulky and hard to keep track of. I had one canvasser who actually used to carry around a small accordion file, so he had a different slot for each different item. It was well organized, but a little, most people don't do this. The slide says water, and I put in behind that said careful. And if you stop and think, you'll realize that you're out there walking around neighborhoods and there are no facilities out there. So it can get very difficult as you go through a few hours of canvassing if you drink too much water. So be careful with that, but don't get dehydrated at the same time. Okay, safety and security. People are really worried about this. You're going out into areas that you don't know with people that you don't know, and so makes people nervous. The truth of the matter is that it's very unusual to get into an unsafe situation. I don't remember myself ever having been really kind of scared by where I was, but there are some basic precautions that are worth taking. It's a good idea, when possible, to canvass in pairs as a security thing. If you have a woman and a man, I think people are more likely to open the door if they see a woman than if they just see a strange man standing there. So that's a good combination. It's also good to have oftentimes a person who has a canvassing experience to be working with somebody who doesn't, so it helps somebody to learn, the new person to learn as you go. Oftentimes people will separate as they go, but stay close, preferably in sight or at least within calling distance, like on opposite sides of the street or in different entryways into an apartment building. Stay in the same area. Now, these big campaigns that come in and sort of take over things like Break the Majority or BTM that's beginning to gear up in North Carolina, they oftentimes encourage canvassers to go out alone. And one of the principles of being a canvasser is to do what the canvas director tells you, because they'll always want something a little different that they want done. So if they encourage you to go out canvassing alone, do that. If you feel strongly and really want to go out with somebody, say, no, I'm not going to do that. And they will usually say, okay, well, the reason for that, behind that, is that the big campaigns measure their success by metrics. And one of the metrics is the number of doors that they knock on. So they will, they want to look good and accomplish big things, and they do that by having big numbers. And so they want to knock on a lot of doors. And the people who are running the canvasses, the professionals in running the campaigns, get their performance evaluated by their metrics. So they have a personal investment in knocking on a lot of doors. So they want you to go out alone. So expect that. Having said all that, you want to, if you see a house that looks spooky or a little scary, just don't go there. On the list, you can mark inaccessible or whatever else little box that you check off there. Sometimes whole neighborhoods seem like, I'm not going there. Don't go there. If somebody has a sign up says keep out or do not enter or some other unwelcoming sign, they don't want you there. They have it up for a reason, however they're saying it. And usually the best thing to do is honor that. If you don't, they're probably going to be upset and angry, and that's the last thing you ever want to do with somebody. So if it says that, just pass on to the next house and put inaccessible. And of course, if you see a dog or something that you're scared of, don't take a chance. It's how you approach the door and conduct yourself at the door is important. One of the fundamental principles of canvassing is to always act with respect and courtesy toward the people you're canvassing. Respect their privacy, respect their house and the things that they have. Part of that is you use the front walk to walk up to the front door. You don't go, you go to the front of the house, you can go around to just a little bit around the side if there's a side door that looks like the best one to knock on, but don't go to the back of the side of the house or certainly never into the backyard. don't walk across the lawn. Lawns are really important to a lot of people. They do not like people walking on them. So just respect that and use the walk. Now, occasionally I've violated that, particularly if I found that nobody's home, and if it's immensely shorter to go to the next house to cut across the lawn than to go a long way around. I'll sometimes do it, but for the most part, go up the driveway and the front path. When you get to the door, ring the doorbell just once. Listen to see if you hear the doorbell. If you know that the doorbell is wrong, you won't need to knock again. And if they don't answer, you know they're probably not home or just don't want to come to the door, so you can go away. About half of doorbells do not work. So if you don't hear it, you don't know if it's just in the back of the house and you're not hearing it, or whether it doesn't work. So you assume that they haven't heard it, and then you knock. You have to knock firmly enough that it will be heard throughout much of the house, but not too demandingly, which will be rude. You wait enough time, which is probably 10 or 15 seconds, and then knock again. If nobody answers, you can leave. It takes some people a long time, however, to get to the door. Elderly people maybe who knows what they're doing, whether they're even dressed or something. So sometimes you're walking down the street away from the house and the door will open, somebody will have gotten there. In which case you go back and you apologize and have your conversation. After you knock, when you're knocking, you have to be pretty close to the door, of course. But somebody's going to come to the door and you can't be that close at that point. It'll be right in their face. So step back from the door. I oftentimes, particularly because I'm pretty tall, I'll step down a step or two on the front steps just so that they aren't come out and suddenly have to look up. But things like that just improve the first impression that they're going to have when they come out the door to look at you. You want to dress appropriately and give some thought to it. You don't want to dress too formally or overdress. You also don't want to dress down to what you think the demographic or characteristics of the people are that you're canvassing. Just dress yourself as you normally would. I'm an older guy, so if I went out in, like flip-flops and jeans and a t-shirt, it would be inappropriate. But if I was a 22-year-old, it would probably be inappropriate to go out with a pressed button-down collar shirt and long khaki pants or something. So dress so it matches yourself and doesn't and treats the voter with respect. Because as the next one says, consideration and respect has to be at the base of all that you do. And coming from that place, you'll behave like you're a guest, because you are. And of course, you're looking pleasant if you're doing that. But the next thing is really important. Always keep your cool. Don't let yourself get angry, upset, or defensive, no matter what happens, because you really want to leave a voter pleased and not upset. And always at the end, thank the voter for talking to you. I always think of something else to thank them for. Thank you for being so nice. Thank you for having such a great smile. Thank you for being so engaged in our politics, or whatever it is that you thank them for. And then you leave the area of the door. It's best if you can, when you're filling in the data, to go out of sight of the door. Certainly not right at the door, at least down the walk. But people may be looking at you through the Venetian blinds, through the peephole in some way, pulling the curtain aside. And if they see you writing something on a pad of paper or on an iPad or something, they're going to feel kind of weird. What are they saying about me? What are they putting down? So that can be an uncomfortable thing for feeling. So if possible, do it out of sight. And more than anything else, just have fun as you do it. You'll be really surprised at the conversations that you have, how really satisfying, gratifying they are. Makes the whole thing tremendously worthwhile and actually fun. So we're going to pause here for a few minutes for any questions that may have come in. Jenny, do we have any questions here? None of you ask any questions? Okay. In that case, we can move on, and I'll pass this over to Karen Sindelar, who's going to do the second half.
Hello, I'm Karen Sindelar, and I'm going to be covering the issues that you'll be dealing with as you actually have conversations with voters at the door. So when we are at the door, what are we really doing? What we're trying to do is has a lot of aspects. We're trying to provide information. We're trying to obtain information. We're sometimes registering voters or updating registration information. But as Jim already pointed out, we are also all the time trying to have a positive and great conversation. The information that we're trying to provide will depend primarily on the purpose of the canvass. So the purpose of the canvass may be to talk extensively or give information about the local candidate who's running for a state House or Senate seat. It may be more general about the Democratic Party. It may have to do with judges or the constitutional initiatives. So the information that you're providing will not be standard in every canvass. It really depends on the canvass itself. In terms of the essential information that you're trying to get, as Jim already pointed out, the data that we have in the Democratic Party's database is often very inadequate. It is based primarily on what is given to us by the State Board of Elections, and it can be updated. Thank you. I forgot to flip the slide, sorry. It can be updated by volunteers like you who are going out and updating the information, but essentially it is still based on public data that the State Board of Elections has. And that public data does not include phone numbers. So the Democrats try to get phone numbers by purchasing them in bulk or using other sources of information to match up voters with phone numbers. But oftentimes that matchup is not correct. So the essential information that we are trying to get is usually whether or not that voter is still at the address that you are canvassing, and what their phone number and other information like email, if you can get it, is. The other essential information is, of course, whether they are leaning Democrat or progressive. As Jim noted, so many of our canvasses are targeted to supporters or presumed supporters, but at the same time, these days in particular, we cannot assume that everybody who's registered as a Democrat is actually a progressive voter. So even though you may have a list that shows that somebody is registered as a Democrat, that person may be somebody who has flipped to the Republican side. And very frequently, when voters do that, they do not change their registration. So it is very important to get information from the voter about their voting preference. The other information, of course, is from unaffiliated voters. Jim mentioned independents. Actually, they show up on our list as unaffiliated. And unaffiliated voters very typically are more youthful voters who have gotten turned off these days by party politics, and they don't actually want to register as a Democrat or a Republican. They prefer to register as unaffiliated. Of course, the challenge for Democrats is seeing these thousands of unaffiliated voters and not knowing whether they're progressive or not. So when we go to the door, we're trying to get that information from the voter. We need to have a positive interaction. I think Jim actually covered this adequately. You know, our primary purpose is, of course, to get these things when we're at the door, to give information, but it all has to be done in a positive and natural way. So it's important in doing that to use your own style and your own manner of speaking. Don't act like somebody else. Don't think that you have to come in like your friend who happens to be more assertive than you, or even like another canvasser that you're going around with. That person is using their style. You need to use your own style, because your own style is always going to be the most effective. You need to try to have a conversation. Don't dominate or give a speech. That can be difficult, because if you have this challenge of having a lot of information to give out, and you're trying to get information, it seems like you are going to be talking a lot of the time. But one way, I think, to keep that from happening is to start by introducing yourself as a volunteer, and then immediately move into a general discussion of issues that that voter might care about. And that gives that voter a chance to start talking. You can, as the voter talks, you should listen. You know, you're not just sitting there thinking, okay, what am I saying next? You're trying to listen to what the voter has to say and pick up on it. Relate something that they have to say to an issue that your candidate that you're supporting or canvassing for has a position on. So listen to what that voter is saying. Don't argue. The voter is always right. And I think that's very true, and that if the voter gives an opinion about something, you absolutely do not want to argue with them. Occasionally, however, the voter may say something factual, like, well, I hear that they've gotten rid of early voting or something like that. You certainly can correct that kind of information. But the important thing is not to argue about opinions, but to respect what you're hearing from the voter, even if you disagree with it. Appreciate and acknowledge the voter. That comes again from listening to the voter and picking up on the points that they're making, and not just feeling like you have to be making points. And finally, if the voter is hostile or is a Republican, disengage quickly and be polite and thank them for their time and leave. You don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste their time. And as Jim, I think, already pointed out, most conservative voters, they're going to identify themselves fairly immediately. If you identify yourself as a Democratic volunteer, they're going to say, well, I'm a Republican, or I vote conservative, or I'm not on your side. And that's very useful. It keeps you from spending a lot of time talking to somebody in a conversation that will not be helpful. Now we're going to talk about scripts. Most Canvas organizers will provide you with the script. Our point here says scripts will be provided by the organizer. I have actually canvassed at times where they do not provide a script. So I would say they usually will be provided by the organizer, but sometimes they aren't. Sometimes a canvassing operation will send you out with a voter list and some campaign materials, and that's it. So we have provided in our materials a sample script that I would suggest that you look at for tips for how to move from one topic to another topic, starting with introduction, moving on to identifying what party or viewpoint that voter supports, then moving on to collecting information. So, and the script that we've provided is just a guide. It's a guide that you should refer to if you do not have another script that's been provided by the campaign. Now, if you have a different script or you have campaign materials that they provided that you're supposed to distribute, look at them, because that script is going to tell you what important points that Canvas wants is oriented around, what they want you to cover. So it's not going to be very helpful if you go out canvassing for a particular candidate and all you do is go out and talk about issues and Democrats. That canvas wants you to actually talk about the candidate. That means you have to get to know the candidate's point of view and and what their stance is on issues. So you need to look at that campaign literature. You need to familiarize yourself with the candidates' views and positions on issues. You need to identify the types of issues that you think are going to sell well with the voters that you're talking to. And you need to know something about that candidate's background. You know, it's not very effective to go out and be campaigning for a canvas or for a candidate and you don't know anything about, you know, their age, what their job is, their experience. So you need to learn that so that you can use that in your conversation with the voter. You do not need, however, to follow a script word for word or read it at the door. And in fact, that's not just you do not need to, you can't and you shouldn't. What you're trying to do when you canvass is to have a natural conversation. You're trying to be yourself, and you can't do that if you're reading from a script. It would be very disconcerting, I think, for a voter to open the door and talk to somebody who's reading from a piece of paper, and you would not be very effective. So the important thing, as I've noted, is to go over the information beforehand so you know it, but then you're not sitting there using it really. At the most, what you could do that's very useful is to highlight key information from a campaign literature or a script so that you are sure that you've actually covered those points. So in your conversation with a voter, you might look down at your notes to see if you've covered something. But again, you're not reading from anything. The noted poet and author and civil rights activist Maya Angelou said it best when she said, "People will forget what you say, people will forget what you do, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I guess this is probably the third or fourth time we've gone over this point, but your point in doing all this is to have a positive interaction, and the voter needs to feel good at the end of that interaction, because that's what they're going to remember. And the quote at the bottom, "The power of canvassing stems from the personal connection that face-to-face communication provides. When done properly, canvassing opens a conversation with voters." That's true. As I think Jim has pointed out, canvassing is the most effective way of reaching voters, and it is that effective because you are making that personal connection with the voter. You're exposing a little bit of yourself, your personality. They're exposing something to you. It's like meeting a new, I like to say friend, but usually it doesn't progress to that degree, but it's like meeting a good acquaintance. And you are understanding a little bit about their life, their point of view, and they are knowing something about your personality and why you care about being out there as a volunteer. That's very important. So now we're going to talk about data collection. As Jim has noted, and I think I've already noted, collecting accurate data is a crucial part of canvassing. The data that the Democrats have is usually from Vote Builder, which is a particular database that the Democrats have developed over many years, and it uses as a base information from the State Board of Elections. And unfortunately, that data does not stay up to date. And that's largely because voters, when they leave or when they move, they don't re-register. They don't go into their Board of Elections and change their information. And so people move around, and new people end up in households, and And that is not something that the State Board of Elections picks up on until election time, when that voter may vote again and change the information. So there's often a long period of time where there's inaccurate information even about where people are, especially for lower income voters that are transient. And so it is important to be able to correct that information as you go around canvassing. The other information that, as I noted before, is important is information on phones, cell phones in particular. That's not publicly available, and the information in the Democratic database is oftentimes wrong. So Canvass organizers will provide you with the data sheet, and I'm going to show you what one of those looks like on the next page. It's important to cover all the questions on the data forms that are provided to you, to write legibly, and to return these forms to the Canvass organizers at the end of your canvass. So here's what one sheet looks like, one data sheet. This is not necessarily what you'll see in your canvass. Canvass organizers can actually draw up numerous fields from this Vote Builder database. You will typically see the information on the left, the information that identifies the voter, their party, their sex, their age, their address. You will certainly see the results column, and probably the Democratic support column, and probably the volunteer column, but you typically may see at least a few other columns of information that the data or that the Canvass organizers want you to fill out. In this particular example, however, let's look at the very first entry. That's Mark Sullivan, Party Democrat, sex male, age 50. You're not correcting all information there. If what you are trying to figure out initially is this Mark Sullivan? And you do that initially by introducing yourself and asking fairly early on if the person you're talking to is that person. Because if it's not, then you have something else to do, which is either possibly register a new voter or correct information. But you do need to determine this at the beginning of your conversation. Is this the person who's on the sheet? The information that follows the name there, the precinct, that again, you do not have to correct that type of information. That is all the information that's from the State Board of Elections and your local Board of Elections. And so that's a known fact. If you're talking to Mark Sullivan, then he is at that address and he's in that precinct. But what you don't know is whether that phone number is correct, that landline is correct, whether the cell phone is correct. And it's important, if you can get that information, to correct or add that. The van ID is something that you can ignore. That's something that just Democrats use. The next column, which is the results column, is, again, easy to fill out. It's important to know what some of these abbreviations stand for. INATC is not inaccurate, it's inaccessible. DEC means deceased. So again, just understand what the abbreviations are. Democratic support is, I think, obvious. Sometimes that's not so easily assessed. You can have an entire conversation with a voter, and they can even tell you that they generally vote Democrat, but you still can't figure out whether they are a strong support or lean support, and sometimes even not, just unsure. So this is one of your main purposes in having this conversation, though, is to figure this out, because this is so important to the Democrats in determining who to target for further get out the vote efforts. Finally, there's this volunteer column. You're only going to get into that with people you talk to who seem particularly supportive or enthusiastic. Clearly, if somebody's a little bit wavering or just not a strong supporter, you're not going to talk to them about volunteering. So we have some takeaways. We're near the conclusion of our presentation here, but before we end, I'd actually like to have a short conversation. Oops, looks like we have a question. A few questions. Okay, just the bottom one? Okay, thank you, Jenny. What if someone not on the data sheet answers the door? That is a very good question, and it's a very typical situation. So somebody who's not on the data sheet answers the door, what do? Do you continue the conversation with that person? Do you ask for the person who is on the data sheet? I think that depends. In general, I ask if the person who's on the data sheet is available, because your primary purpose is to reach that particular voter who's on your data sheet. So it may be that multiple people are living in the house and that person is also there. And at least you can find out if that person is not there, if they still live there. In fact, practically all the time when I go out canvassing, I get information about people who've moved from other people who are living in a house. If the person is not on the data sheet and not there, I generally continue the conversation. I look at it as an opportunity to correct information. So often what you're going to find is the person is there, who is there is somebody who's moved from elsewhere in the county. And so what you can do is to correct the, you can show on the data sheet that Mark Sullivan, for example, is not there, but that this other person is there. You can write it at the bottom of the data sheet or on your blank piece of paper, and then the people who are entering data can use that to correct that other person's information. It is amazing though, sometimes the data sheets that you have do not pick up on everybody who's in a household. I had an experience just recently where a woman who was the wife of the person I was supposed to be reaching answered the door, and I could tell she was friendly, and I didn't want to ask for her husband. I said, in fact, I questioned myself. I said, why isn't this person on my data sheet? And so I thought, well, I'm going to continue this conversation. And as it turned out, she was actually the most important voter in the household because she was interested in volunteering. And she had been a regular Democratic voter for years. And for some reason, she wasn't on my data sheet. So I had a 10-minute conversation with her, and I think actually provided a good future volunteer for the party. I was also able to find out from her that her husband generally voted Democrat too. So I got the information that I needed about the person who I was supposed to be talking to. We have another question. If we sign up with the organizer, sorry, Jenny, can you read this?
They contact us about when and where to get materials.
If we sign up with the organizer, will they contact us about when and where to get materials? Yes, absolutely. You sign up for a canvassing event or organization, and they will contact you, probably by email, maybe by phone as well, and you will get further information about where to go and perhaps what to bring. Oftentimes, canvassers don't really bring much. The organization might provide the clipboards, the pens, everything else. But if you're supposed to bring things, then the organizer will let you know that as well. We also have a question, do you try to talk to everyone in the household? I actually will, because I think that's an efficient thing to do. I mean, I'm the person at the door, even though the Democrats have said this one person is the target. If there are other people there, I take it as an opportunity to possibly register new voters. And so I will, if there are other people there, and I'll oftentimes ask, are there other people here today that I should talk to? But not everybody would necessarily take that approach, and I'd actually like Jim to answer that question as well.
Which question?
Do you try to talk to everyone in the household?
Well, thank you for asking me to comment on that. one of the things to take away is that there are lots of different ways of canvassing, and what Karen and I are saying today are sort of the ways we've developed, but different people have other ways of doing it. I oftentimes, because I also want to reach a lot of the people on my list, I may not actually, if I'm talking to the person who I say the person I was on my list answers the door and there are 5 other people sitting in the living room watching TV, I will usually talk to the person that is on the list. In that kind of situation, I won't take the time to have a conversation with the others. Now, they might be great conversations, they might be great voters, they might be a volunteer, but they might also not be. So I'll usually move on to get to my next person. And so everybody has their own way of dealing with that, and there are no clear, definite answers to that. One thing I would do in that situation, however, is I would try to determine whether any of those 5 people sitting in the room watching TV need to update their voter registration, because there's a pretty good chance that they moved from someplace else and that their address as listed with the Board of Elections is not where they now live. So update the voter registration at that point.
Before we end and before we get to these key takeaways from this presentation, I'd like to talk to Jim a little bit further about what he considers to be some of the challenges or the greatest challenges he has faced in canvassing and what he considers to be the biggest rewards in canvassing. And I'll answer that as well. I think that generally canvassing is a positive experience, but it's a scary experience for many people, especially if you haven't been doing it. And even experienced canvassers have challenges. And so I don't want to present an overly rosy picture of something that can be a challenge for people, but I think there are ways of dealing with those challenges. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit right now.
Yeah. Well, Karen, that's really a great question. You asked me this question before we started today, and so we had a chance to chat and think about it a little bit. And I don't think there are any big obstacles that I face in doing it. I do, however, find it difficult, or I have to be very intentional about working a canvas into my schedule. I've got lots and lots of things going with other activities, with grandchildren, with family stuff, and just getting what may be, depending on how far you drive to get there, it may be a 3 or 4, even 5-hour commitment, which is a lot. So it's hard working that in. It's sometimes hard dealing with the physical challenges. And that's something to consider if you're considering canvassing, because some of the terrains that you canvass are difficult. They're hilly apartment complexes. You can go going up and down 3 flights of stairs to get to these apartments. And a day like today is going to develop into 92 degrees order. It can be challenging. So those are challenges. But beyond that, the reason that I do it and what brings me satisfaction are really twofold. Number one, I really do enjoy talking to people. Even though I am an introvert, I enjoy many of the conversations. And if you're on a canvas where you say knock on 30 doors, you will average 30% of those 30 doors will answer, which would be like you might get 9 actual contacts out of the 30 knocks. Of those 9 contacts, probably 4 or 5 of them will be good conversations, and some of them will be great. And that's what keeps me going. I really love having the conversations that are just people, they're just great. There's great people. I actually find it kind of reaffirms or it advances my appreciation of humanity when I'm out on canvassing and have these conversations. The other reason, of course, that I really am satisfied by doing it is I know that I'm doing something that contributes to my commitment to what this country and society stand for, and that knowing that that stands for what's possible for human beings in life, and lots of the other stuff that's going on right now not only doesn't stand for that, but is trying to tear that down. So when I'm out there and it's 92 degrees and I'm dripping sweat and getting tired and my knee hurts, I think I'm here for a reason.
Well, that answer inspired me. I think my biggest challenge in canvassing is probably the days that I go out And I start out and I get a lot of people not answering the door. And of the people who are answering the door, I maybe just have some so-so conversations and nothing that really gets me very excited. I think I can react fairly emotionally. And, you know, after an hour of that, I can get discouraged. And so what I have to remind myself in canvassing is how important the information that I'm getting is. So even if, let's say, 20% of the people I'm talking to end up sounding like they are conservative or leaning the other way or Republican, I have collected really useful information for the Democrats in their future efforts. We need to know that that person who's registered as a Democrat or possibly as unaffiliated is not a supporter. So even though emotionally it's bringing me down to be collecting data that is not for us, I'm collecting useful data, and that makes me feel good, even though emotionally I might not feel very happy. The biggest reward for me is probably what Jim said. It's just having these contacts with people, and it's providing information to people whose lives may be more challenged than mine. They may not know about early voting. They may have a hard time getting to vote. And so if I am providing information that's going to make it more likely for them to vote, get them to the polls, I feel great. So with that said, oops, looks like we have some more questions.
There's another question that was just handed to me by Jenny here. That is, how effective is it to canvass rural Republican counties? Should we just focus on urban areas? And what do we do about apartments? Those are really great questions. And I think the first thing I'll say is that for the most part, these kinds of issues, that is who to canvass, where to canvass, will be decided by the people who are designing the canvass, who are organizing and setting up the canvass. They choose not just the kind of list they want to pull off the vote builder, but also the area. For example, a Democratic candidate for the North Carolina House of Representatives will probably want to make sure that they really, really concentrate on the highest density Democratic voting neighborhoods. And they won't want to go out and go door to door in a very sparsely populated deep red area. That's just common sense. So it really, you can count pretty much on the campaigns and the people who are organizing it to make these decisions. Apartments are kind of a special case. Apartments tend to be very transient in areas with a school, such as, of course, Orange County here, also parts of Alamance County with Elon College being a large thing there. The student apartments have a huge turnover almost year to year. I went to a canvass here in March up on northern Chapel Hill. I canvassed an apartment complex in which not a single person on my walk list lived there anymore. I didn't contact one person on the list. Now somebody lived there. I had some great conversations. I got 2 people who wanted to volunteer, so it was productive, but not a single person was there. The turnover is so great. So you don't want to go and canvass an apartment complex in a student area in the spring of the year with the election in the fall, because they'll probably all be moved by the end of the summer and won't even be living there, or maybe not even voting here. So those are considerations. And Karen has something she wants to say about that also.
Right. In the precinct that I organize in Durham, we have a whole lot of apartments. And I think that's why hopefully your canvas organizer is familiar with the various apartment complexes in your area, or the area that they've got in their canvas. We have apartments that have a lot of working class folks who have actually been there a long time. They are unfortunately intermittent voters. So in the last election, in fact, we focused our efforts on those apartments because a lot of the single family areas in our precinct had voters who typically voted more regularly. And we did not have the time or the energy to do the single family canvassing because it takes a lot longer. So I think that apartment canvassing can be very useful, but your organizer should know how useful it is. And I would say that if you are in any area where there are students, if you are canvassing in apartments, you or your partner has to know how to register voters, because that is going to be key. There will be a lot of people who are turning over, and there you are at the door, and that is the best way to get those people registered. Jenny, do we have any other questions? Okay, so in ending, I'd like to say we have these summaries or key takeaways. Let's see. We have key takeaways from our presentation today. The importance of canvassing as a tool for the Democratic Party. It is the most effective thing we do. Secondly, that it's generally targeted to supporters, or at least people we think are going to be supporters, such as unaffiliated voters, especially unaffiliated youthful voters. Our goal is to have positive interactions and natural conversations, and also, as we've emphasized, to get information. You need to follow canvassing tips to have the best possible experience. Please collect your data in an accurate and legible way. Don't write notes all over your data sheets. Other people are going to enter that data into the database, and if you write illegible notes, they can't do that very well. And finally, just try to enjoy yourself. It is enjoyable. Jim mentioned that he's an introvert. I'm actually an introvert too. Yet in my job and in my volunteer work, I've learned to push myself out and be more friendly and communicative, and I enjoy that challenge. And so I think that you can too, even if you don't consider yourself a natural canvasser, you can become a canvasser, a really effective canvasser. So thank you very much for your time today. Jim, do you have anything else?
No, I said what you last said, that you can become an effective canvasser, is really great, because I've never quite taken this view of canvassing before, but you could view canvassing as an opportunity for self-development, couldn't you?
I think it is. I personally think it is, yes.
What that would add to your overall life, would be enriching. So canvas. Thank you all.
Okay, if you would ask them if they could come back next Saturday.
Okay, we're supposed to ask you one more thing if you haven't already hung up. There's a canvas next Saturday that I'm just looking at page 4, which is on July 21st, about organizing your precinct from same time from 10 to 11. And advanced registration is required. And will they have a link in their email about this, Julie?
Hi, this is Julie Tomkiewicz again, and I'm stepping in clearly since this had been recorded earlier. We were on a different webinar schedule, but I'm pausing the webinar re-recording here so that you've got our C2C information. You have the email up if you've got questions about either this webinar, or you need more backup information, or you want to hear a little bit more about the webinar schedule in general. You can let us know by writing us at c2ctrainings@orangedems.com. Again, that's c2ctrainings@orangedems.com. My name is Julie Tomkiewicz. Thank you so much for spending a little part of your day with us today. And I wish you the best of success in your future canvasses coming up. I know you're going to be going like gangbusters. It's going to be fantastic. And we're going to see all the results of our work, of course, this November. I also look at this as kind of a two-step. We want to be very successful this November, and then all of us want to build our county priorities, get to build our precincts to be even stronger, and make our thoughts and our voices heard in 2020 as well. So this is a short-term process, but it's also a long-term process with goals as well. And thank you again for joining us here today. Bye.